Yo, how are you doing, folks? Welcome to episode 122 of the Simpa Life Podcast. Hope you are keeping well. We are meteorologically now in autumn. Summer's done, although ironically here in the UK, it's getting bloody warm. So you may see me sweating my box off inside this little hotbox studio today with today's guest. I'm not going to waffle on about the weather. There's a lot, obviously, in the news that we're going to cover today. I think it's brilliant that we've managed to get an American guest on today to cover a lot of the news that I wanted to talk about this week. So without further ado, I will introduce today's guest and we'll get rolling with this show. So they are a cannabis agronomist, which I don't know what that is, but we'll find out together shortly, a microbiologist and cannabis crop advisor with over 20 years experience. They are the owner of Bokashi Earthworks, a former cannabis prisoner, and a current writer at Skunk Magazine. They are Brandon Rust. How are you doing, man?
Hey, thanks for having me on. I always appreciate when people reach out and are interested in what's going on, especially because I do a lot of work in cannabis. I do a lot of work in the science, and I also do a lot of work to help people understand what's happening with the legislation locally. For anybody who's not familiar with me, my name's Brandon Rust. You can find me at Instagram at rust.brandon and also Bokashi Earthworks, same place. I do a lot of content creation that is educational, and I'm the only owner of Bokashi Earthworks, and we specialize in green waste recycling. We manufacture soil. We work with NASA agricultural technologies and we sell this smart carbon humate fertilizer. And then we also do cannabis agronomy, soil recommendations. We manufacture microbes for living soil systems, soil remediation, all types of good stuff. So, and then we have a couple of projects that we're currently working on to basically eliminate single-use plastics and starter fertilizers in agriculture. So lots going on over here, and appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously, we've been trying to hook this up for a little while. I mean, following your work for quite a long time, there's so many people in the space around the world that it is hard to sort of keep track of people. But I think, as you listed there, several of your kind of key objectives, your mission in life, are something that I have a kinship to, and I'm always, as many of my audience will attest to, I'm always a stickler for the legislation. So I'm very excited to have you here. You've I suppose answered quite a few of some of the questions, or at least alluded to them with your initial comments there. But I suppose let's take it back to the beginning. We'll ask the general kind of question I ask most people when they come onto this platform who come from cannabis, and that is, when and how did you first get involved with cannabis?
So I first got involved with smoking when I was a teenager, probably 14 or 15. I come from a pretty rough background. I was in an orphanage when I was younger, was taken away from my parents, and I went through a lot of bad situations when I was younger. I was placed into a stable foster environment when I was around 4.5 or 5. But when I was around 6, I was put on psychiatric medicine by a psychiatrist. And up until the point when I was about 14, I started smoking weed, and I didn't like taking medicine. It was kind of like, I was always being gaslit. People telling me I had issues, or that, I didn't think the right way. I didn't think the way that they thought. Just those types of situations. And I became rebellious, got into like punk rock music when I was younger. And that kind of sent me onto a kind of different path. I started smoking pot, and it was the first time that I had a type of mental awakening to where it increased my awareness. It increased my awareness and allowed me to realize that there were different levels of consciousness, and everything wasn't like, I knew there wasn't just a box that everything fit in, and so I liked the way it made me feel. And at that time I was on a medication that made me feel like a zombie. So I stopped taking medication and I just started smoking pot, kind of infrequently. And then it became regular. But that's how I originally got started. And then the way that I got involved with the cultivation when I turned 18 was the foster care home that I had lived at for, from the time that I was, you know, 5 to about 14, 15, when I kept getting kicked out and stuff. When I turned 18, I got a hold of my biological mother, and she got me in contact with my biological father, who was serving a prison term. And he told me that I should go meet some of his friends. And so I met up with some of his friends that didn't know that I existed and stuff, and they all kind of tripped out on me. But I ended up getting involved with a couple of guys that were growing weed, and they put me to work, and I was just doing a bunch of bullshit for those guys, washing their dog, mowing their yards. And they were just kind of testing the waters, because they didn't know me personally. They knew that I was, my dad's kid, but it was still very clandestine back then. So that everybody was really, really careful, and eventually earned their trust. And I got in with those guys, and they, taught me how to grow weed, and they had multiple grow rooms set up, and they were doing their thing. And that's how I learned. I learned through a couple of OGs when I was still a teenager. And then I worked with them for a couple of years in the grow, doing, trimming, selling their weed, meeting their friends too, other people that would get cuts from them and would grow weed. And I would, so I started to build a network through these OGs, and I was basically schooled by a bunch of guys that were 11, 12 years older than me, and they were like, they called me the kid, and I was selling, different people's weed, and I was, I saw stuff, like, it was crazy, because I got to a point where, like, they showed me their rooms, at the very beginning. I was like, fucking, this is insane. I was like, I'm finally here. I finally made it. Like, this is the plug. This is where it all fucking starts. Like, I'm at the motherfucking top now. That's what was going through my head. And it was so exciting to be in that space, because I've been chasing that shit for 3 fucking years since I was like 15. Like, I'm trying to find fucking good chronic instead of always have to smoke Mexi, or like, where the fuck is this? Where's the fucking end of this? And that was it. It was right there. And so, but it was cool, because I got to that point and I started learning about everything, and I learned how to clone, and I learned how to, pH and do my PPMs and mix newts and change resis and, the whole 9 yards. I did everything. I even fucking learned how to steal power. That was one of the first things I did, actually. And what ended up happening was I met people like Boxer, and I thought that these guys were like the top. And I went to grows where there was, we were doing houses that had maybe 12 lighters, where we'd be busting off 4-bedroom houses that had 3 4,000 watt flowering rooms, and a couple of clone racks, and a 1,000 watt metal halide and veg. And we're fucking loading these rooms up every 2 weeks. And I went to the places that were like 100, 200 lighters, where it was like, oh, this is the fucking big dog right here. He's the one that's fucking pushing weight, he's fucking growing, huge systems. So I met all kinds of people like that too. So it was really cool. I met people like Hopper, who was the manager for the Cottonmouth Kings, and him and one of my other homeboys had a dispensary, and I was slanging. They were like the first legal dispensary in San Diego, out in California. That's where I'm originally from. I'm in Oklahoma now, in the Midwest, but the people that I got to meet and network with just kind of allowed me to, slang weed and plug people, get weed from these different types of people. And it was cool. It was fun, man. It was like I was a fucking youngster, and I was like the man, 2 years after working for them, I had like multiple apartments myself, and I should have been more fiscally responsible had I not probably come from the environment previously that I had come from, where it was low income, foster homes, me getting kicked out of school, in and out of fucking living situations. If I would have learned about savings and, again, fiscal responsibility, I think things would have maybe been different because I was just partying back then. I was blowing money. I'd go to the bar, spend hundreds on the bar, be like, oh, I'm too drunk to drive. Let's get a limo, cruising around town in a limo for the next hour, spending money, getting loaded. And it's like that type of shit was just so wasteful. It was shit that I could have back then, saved money, started buying property, started my businesses,
Yeah,
but
man.
it is what it is. But yeah, I mean, it was fun. And it was, pounds were going for almost $5,000 a piece. So that's like the equivalent of getting $12,000 for a kilo. You know what I mean? For all your European listeners.
Yeah, man, good margins. And again, at a time when I suppose the pound to the dollar was at quite a much higher rate than it has been for the past decade or so. Interesting. Very similar kind of upbringing. I was the same. If I was kicked out of school, was I wasn't put up for foster care. Or I was put into fostering, but no one would take me because I would threaten to burn the place down as a very rambunctious 6 or 7 year old. And I was put into some very dodgy schoolings, and I got introduced to cannabis early. And same, I was on Ritalin for ADHD as a kid. And we just, instead of Ritalin closing me down and going, here's the space I'm allowed to live in day to day, it blew the world open for me. Do you know what I mean? And it was almost an awakening of emotions. I remember we had a thing called, we'd called it tack in the UK, really low grade hash that would then often be melted and repressed into other shit, and it would end up basically getting cut, and it was just terrible. And the first time I smoked it was in a lung, which is like you cut a bag off, the top of a bottle off, and use like a bread bag, and you tape it on the side, and you use a vacuum suck. And yeah, it was the most harshest, horriblest. Like once I'd stopped coughing and kind of caught my breath, the next sort of few hours were like, this thing. I want life to kind of revolve, be connected to this thing, and for years just pursued it. So yeah, it's really interesting to hear. Obviously, I stated in your introduction that you were a former cannabis prisoner. Was it cultivation in Cali that you got caught up in?
Yeah. So I think it was maybe March of 2006. I got my first, that was like my first term. I got a prison term on that one. I had previously, so I was on the run because I got busted. I got busted with 10 pounds of fucking swag, Mexi brickweed. And I did like 10 days and shit, and they put me on probation. Not a big deal. I was like, whatever. But I was like, fuck probation. I was like, I ain't doing any of this shit. I ain't playing this fucking game. Like, because to me, all the fucking rules, all the regulations that are imposed on people are all fictitious. They're all fictitious unless everybody agrees to it, right? And nobody really is agreeing to it. They're just so distracted by everything else that's going on. The people that want to implement these laws and legislations, they do at their own benefits, not the benefits of a collection. And so it was kind of like me looking at how we have the Declaration of Independence, and it's kind of based off of God-given law, whatever your idea of God is, whatever, but being the idea that there's something higher than ourselves that we could strive for as moral principles, and don't tread on other people, just the basics of, like what is written in like the 10 Commandments, not to like try to go there again, but it's like those types of ideas, they were always important. I understood them, not from a religious perspective, but just from a societal perspective, and how most of what we're experiencing is kind of, it's weird. It's like a collective misremembering of how things should be, because of how distracted everybody is, and how nobody's actually focused on the things that are important or things that are actually real.
Mm.
And so we have all these laws and shit. And I don't know, I just didn't agree with it. So I was like, I'm not going to fucking obey them. You know what I mean? Because I'm not hurting any, like, if I was committing a crime, which by the idea of crime, there would be a victim, right? Because to be crime, there has to be a victim. That's just common sense. And common law is based off of common sense. But legislation isn't. And so I could have a crime of growing, it could be a crime to grow a plant, but that doesn't make any fucking sense from a logical perspective, right? It doesn't make any sense because there's no inherent victim of growing a plant, right? There's no inherent victim of, if somebody chooses like to do something that doesn't harm another person, it doesn't make sense to me. It's not logical. So I guess that kind of thinking got me in trouble. But so I had that, and I was just doing my thing, man. And I was growing weed. It was 2006. I had taken over a spot that my mentors and the guys that had taught me were like, we're cool in this place. We're moving on to bigger and better things. And it was the very first place that I ever went to. It was a 4-bedroom. It was 12. It was 3 rooms, flower rooms, 4,000 watts each, checkerboard, metal halide, HPS, in an ebb and flow bucket system. And it was a place I had been running forever, so I was familiar with it. But I was with this girl, and she started seeing a cop. They set me up, and I got busted. I did 16 months on a prison term for cultivation, sales, and theft of electricity were the 3 felony charges that ended up sticking. I did half my time in like county jail, to where all of the trials and all the other shit were taking place. And then after that shit was done, I was sentenced. I finished out the remainder of my time in 2 different prisons, which was anybody who is unclassified. When you go to prison in America, you go to a holding prison. And at this time it was Donovan down in San Diego, but there was 2 of them. I think it was Chino, and I think it was Donovan were the 2. I could be wrong on the other one, but Donovan for sure, because I was there. But it's just basically a level 4. Everybody is there. They're all pooled together, so nobody's classified yet as far as which level you'll be on. And it's also where, like, if you don't have paperwork and shit like that, shit goes off. Because if you got bad papers, like, pedophile, or you beat up somebody's grandma, or, because there's still kind of like an honor amongst thieves type of mentality, at least for the different, there's like different races that have different rules and regulations that you have to abide by. So prison's fucking crazy though. I was fine, dude. My dad's been in prison since 96. All the key holders knew who he was and shit. And they knew who I was because a lot of those people I had dealt with and been in that circle, because we were all classified together. There's people that were, gang members. There are people that were fucking coke dealers, and I fucking sold weed to them. You know what I mean? Because I was the weed plug. So I knew some of these people, and I didn't have any issues, man. I didn't have any issues while I was there, but I learned like about the inside, because I observed everything. I observed everything from a perspective of an inmate, and then looking at it from the perspective of the guards, and then collectively as the whole thing operates as a whole. And it's a fucking evil system. I mean, the whole thing is based off of essentially the majority, not there. Look at prisons. We need prisons, and we need to keep very bad people away from society, whether they're mental institutions or prisons, because there are some narcissistic, evil people in the world that deserve to be there. However, the majority of people that are there are incarcerated for stupid ass shit. And it's usually a socioeconomic problem that led them there. And it has nothing to do with crime, because a lot of these things are I mean, don't get me wrong. Some of them, there are like burglaries, robberies, and shit like that. But usually those are, and I'm not trying to sympathize with the people who are committing crimes, are usually because of the the resources in their areas, whether it's education, jobs. Those are the two main ones: the ability to have education, entrepreneurship, and usually the people that are in those places, the system is capitalizing on them because they're from those socioeconomically deprived areas. And so you'll see minorities a lot of times, but it's not necessarily just minorities, because there's plenty of white people, there's plenty of black people, there's plenty of Hispanics. And it's not so much a race issue as it is, again, that socioeconomic, that wealth gap. And so these people are not necessarily able to contribute to society because they don't have an educational capacity to help each other out or to provide for themselves. And so they are the lowest class citizens in society. And what happens is the system takes advantage of them. Since they're not paying taxes or working, what they're going to do is they're going to create a recidivism, a system of recidivism, where they're able to keep them coming through these processes so that they can generate income. And they're generating income for private businesses and for local authorities. Like, you have probation centers that are put up, and you have all of these different types of state-funded programs, and then and they don't actually do anything, because I've been in the state-funded programs as well. And in most cases, it's a waste of taxpayer dollars. So you have these systems that take advantage of people, but they also have figured out the logistics on how to operate these things really efficiently and to be profitable at it. So getting taxpayer money to be able, so here's the case. Well, the case was, when I was in there, it costs about $23,000 a year to house an inmate for the state or for the local county of San Diego. At that point, the state or the county received approximately $75,000 per inmate per year. So if they could keep all the beds filled, they're going to make a $50,000 profit on every inmate per year. So that's a decent amount of money. And we're talking about teachers usually make only $23,000, $24,000 a year.
Yeah.
That's a problem. And then what they also do is they have like commissaries and construction crews and laundry crews where they're all inmate-based labor. So they're able to operate these institutions on slave labor, institutionalized slave labor. So in the state prison system, they're making everything from loafed bread to, office furniture and everything in between. And they provide these services. These are public. A lot of times the services the goods that they're creating are for publicly traded corporations. The shit is a fucking mess, dude. And all of the way that the internals operate, it's not right. Like, slavery is well and alive in America. It's just institutionalized. If you can get away with paying somebody 10 cents an hour and then essentially run all inmate commissary for, like, I think there's like 9 jails and institutions that are local in San Diego, and they have one central hub. I know, because I was the fucking manager of that place as an inmate. I had the highest position in that as far as responsibility goes, but I was still only making $3.50 a week, right? And so they try to incentivize it by giving soda coupons and other shit like that. But what you actually see is some of the highest points in operations could be and essentially are managed by inmate slave labor. And so we're talking about all of the laundry that was collected and done for all 9 facilities was done in one laundry facility, all run by inmates. All of the food manufacturing, the largest kitchen in that whole entire state was the jail's kitchen manufacturing, because they were able to put out breakfast, lunch, and dinner for, we're talking about 15,000 meals per day, at least, at a minimum, maybe even more, depending on the capacity of the jails. And they try to keep them as full as possible. And so you have like entire 50, 60 crew, like labor forces in one part of the jail that's doing one task and another that's doing construction. And this is all over the whole fucking state. And it happens in prison. So there's economics built into the prison system that's deeper than just taxpayer funding. It goes into corporate manufacturing. It gets into institutionalized slave labor. It gets into these wacky ass fucking programs where they don't actually do anything, but their people are getting paid for creating curriculums and like, oh, we're creating these fucking curriculums. Like we're going to help these people out. And it's like, it doesn't fucking do anything. Because if they wanted to help people out, they'd give them trade skills. But they don't give money for trade skills, because if they did that, these people will walk out with a fucking skill set and then they wouldn't end up back in the fucking system again. And I know, because I went in and out of that fucking system my whole fucking life.
Mm-hmm.
In 2015, I got popped for making hash. And they gave me a manufacturing charge. That time I did an 18-month prison term. But this time, what they did is the state said, we're no longer taking nonviolent criminal offenders because our prisons are too full. And the state was like, fuck it, we're going to build bigger jails and we'll house them, which is crazy because a misdemeanor is only supposed to be allowable for 1 year in jail. And it's because jails are not meant for long time housing. And it's because like you can't get contact visits. You can't hug your daughter for 10 years. You can go at least have contact visits, spend the day with your family. If you're in prison, they can bring you food from the outside. There's way more privilege.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're in county jail, it's way worse, dude. County is fucking atrocious, dude. Mm-hmm. It's the worst fucking place that you could be. It's way worse than state prisons. The food is worse. The staff is worse. The fucking conditions are worse. The healthcare is worse. It's all worse. And so what they did was they're like, okay, well, the sheriff's department decided, well, we can make money here. We can house these prisoners. We can house these prisoners locally, even though the state was going to release them and say, we're no longer housing nonviolent criminals. Mm-hmm. And so they're like, okay. And now what they've done is the jails in the prisons are so full that they're like, oh, we're not even going to go after criminals if they steal shit anymore. Like, we don't care. We filled everything to capacity and we're growing. We've got the system and the logistics under control. We can basically turn this fucking place, all income areas, into penal colonies where the fucking wealthiest and big corporations and people who want to enforce the fucking regulations to make this thing happen, like law enforcement and probation officers, they're fucking terrible, dude, because all they're doing is they're creating the ability for these things to fucking operate continually, and they're enforcing the fucking legislation that isn't the voice of the word of the people. It's a fucking sick ass fucking system, man. It's morally degrading. It's just so bad. And then the psychologics that are involved are just as bad, because they psychologically degrade people mentally, because they can't take real physical control. Because you've seen what happens when people actually collectively band together in prisons. You see these riots, you see what happens, and to be able to maintain control of people there's a psychological aspect to it, which is really a really terrible place to put people in mentally, and so that whole system is really terrible. Really terrible. Yeah. But don't get me wrong, there are people who are murderers and rapists and people who don't give a shit about moral values. They just are evil people. And there are people that are also just mentally sick, that just are sick. And you see what happens. You can kind of see, like in California, Oregon, places like that. Like San Francisco's a shithole now. Used to be one of the most beautiful cities in California, but it's because they no longer help people. Like, they don't enforce the right types of legislation. They just let corporate economics dictate everything. It's pretty bad, man. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's my experience with the prison system. It's really bad, man. And being able to being able to see it from a perspective like that, being, having an intelligent view of it, and instead of getting caught up in the politics and the madness of it all. Because what happens is when you get in there, there's a psychological aspect. That psychological aspect is partly inflicted by the need for certain races to band together, and then the need for the cops to be banded together against the inmates. So there's always conflict and tension no matter what, right? And so if you can keep people in a state of alert, in a state of fear, and always keep them triggered in the fight or flight response, you can control them. And that's how the media works too, right? Constant bombardment. And so they use the same type of psychological warfare tactics that were developed by, like, probably through like MK Ultra projects and psychological military operations. And they utilize these tactics to maintain control in these, so they can, it's really nuts, man.
Yeah, man. Yeah, well, thank you for sharing the experience. I've made quite a few notes there that I want to kind of revisit on the topic of prisons. Yeah, I mean, the American system obviously is notoriously known around the world as, is the quintessential prison industrial complex. It is for profit, as you say, in a multitude of ways. I mean, yeah, one of the other mechanisms you spoke of that I think should have been spoke of there is cash bail as a system as well. That's basically just a tax. You can avoid that interim step of jail altogether and then wait till your trial. And then if you're convicted, then you go to prison. If you've got that money, if you've got that ability to front that cash or get that money together, and that system is highly prejudicial, it's highly predatory, and it's profiteering from people at their lowest points. As you say, most people that are caught up in the system are not vicious psychopaths. They are people that through desperation, through stupidity, through not sleeping very well, not eating very well, not having a good worldview, good mental health, physical health, have committed an action that, they ultimately have to be held accountable for. But there are these other mitigating factors that, again, if you're wealthy, you can afford that lawyer that goes, oh, no, I know this 17-year-old drunk drove and killed 3 people, but Your Honor, he goes to a prestigious school, his dad's friends with the governor, and all this other fluff and bullshit means that kid would get away with it, and it'd be just, we don't want to blemish him, so we'll hide it on his record. Versus then an inner city kid doing anything to 1/100th of that. They're going to get the book thrown at them purely because, as you say, it's a judgment of utility. They're looking at this individual and going, you are not going to provide taxation and a position within a wider society. So what we're going to use you is for cattle, as cannon fodder for this system. You are a cash cow as far as we can see it. And as you said, it's indentured servitude. It's entirely a created system where you work for the slightest bit of the illusion of improvement. And even that causes issues, as you're saying, with prison politics, with then favoritism, etc., of people then being like goody two-shoes and sucking up, or people, betraying, as you say, the racial lines, the gang lines that govern the modern prison complex. And it's the weaponization of violence and sexual assault, and that fear. That's what they get you with. Is that idea that you've got to behave out here, you've got to follow our arbitrary rules, or we will inflict violence on you. And it comes in the guise of initially, here's a fine, it's a civil infraction. But everything compounds till eventually they will physically grab you, detain you, and throw you in a cage. So as you said, to be governed by consent, it feels like we've lost that consent.
Here's the thing. They will push a narrative, too, that the place is extremely violent. And it is extremely violent, so they have every right to be scared. There's a real fear that's behind that, because I've seen people get murdered. I've seen people get stabbed.
Yeah.
It's a real fucking fear.
It is. And it's insane to think that, I think I was just going to say kids there, but anybody, caught up with plants or frankly any psychoactive substance that ends up in a position where they could be stabbed for not knowing the politics of a system, sitting on the wrong fucking bench when they're eating food. Do you know what I mean? Saying hello to the wrong person, accepting a gift from the wrong person. As you say, the politics are so nuanced that unless you're an older head or you've got experience or you've known people from different generations that have been through that system, you are thrown in entirely, as the parlance is, as a new fish. You are flopping around in that environment, unaware, unable to acclimatize to that situation. And by the time you do, the trauma that has been inflicted upon you is then going to lead to, I think of somebody like, what's his name? Fucking Brosnan, the British prisoner, who kind of went in on one offence and he just became hyper more violent until the point of they just left him to die in prison because he became so violent through a consequence of the environment they placed him in to deal with the crimes that he initially did. But it is that mechanism where the system worsens the individuals that go through it. It's even in the sense of it. I don't mean making them worse criminals or more committed to criminality, but in terms of their mental health, as you were saying before, the trauma you then leave. Some of the people I've spoken to that have done I met what's his name, George Castellano, Hempfest in Seattle one year, and he was in for like 35, 36 years, and the way that he was describing it and the way that he feels, he'd been out for I think 10 months at that point, something like that, and the way he was describing it, he could see physically, he could feel this oozing out of him of uncomfortability of being outside, of the way that it detrimentally affected him.
Yeah, I remember the last time I got out, dude. It was unlike any of the previous times. I don't know if it was because I was in there a little bit longer, more for a longer period of time, but I felt a massive amount of anxiety. I was so overwhelmed. My senses were being triggered by so much overstimulation. I mean, I could hear things that I hadn't heard, smell things that I hadn't smelled. I was experiencing things that were so suppressed. It was like I went into another dimension. It was like I was tripping, but it was like one of those types of trips where you're just where you've known that your environment has been so negative, and so you're just having complete and total overwhelming anxiety.
Yeah.
And it takes a while to readjust from that.
I can imagine. Was obviously your experience with the prison system in San Diego, was that sort of part of the reason for the move to Oklahoma?
So every time that I was there, so I didn't really have too bad of an experience. I never had issues with anybody. You know what I mean? Like at one point I was the guy that was making sure everybody was following the rules. Hey, when they come into our mod or whatever, I'm like, hey, I'm going to give you the whole rundown. I'm going to show you how everything works here. If you have any questions, and I did that because it gives the people more comfort to know exactly what needs to be done. So that way they don't fuck up. So that way they don't disrespect somebody else's space. So they don't disrespect another race's, whatever it is that they have going on, with their hustle or, anything like that. So you have somebody who's basically a representative for your car, and your car is basically your race, right? If you're white, you're with the whites. If you're black, you're with the blacks. If you're Hispanic, you're with the Hispanics. It's just how it is. And the reason why that is because if there's a riot, something pops off, nobody wants to just see violence all the time, right? They don't want to see it. People don't like that tension. They don't like that environment. It's really unnatural.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way that they've kind of put it together in their minds is like, okay, well, whites can't fight a Mexican. You can't. You just can't fight a Mexican. If you fight a Mexican and you're white, there's going to be a riot. That means every single white person and every single Mexican are going to fight, which means all a full-on race riot. Now, nobody wants that, and they make that because if that's what it comes to, if you bring it to that level, you know what the consequences are, and if you're the person that does that and it's not authorized, and you get your car into a race riot, you know that the consequences are going to be even worse for you. And it's basically a deterrent. It's like we don't want interracial wars, but it does still happen. Mm-hmm. But it's also why people check their own people, so why white people will check, it's why a Southsider, a Mexican, Hispanic gang member, or even if they're not gang members, they still check paperwork. They want to make sure that there's no weird shit going on with somebody's charges. And it's so that way there's not that shit doesn't happen, because there's always a threat of that happening, because some white guy sees it and goes, oh, dude, this dude's a pedophile. We don't like, I'm not going to allow that. Like, that's smash on sight. And the Hispanic don't take care of their own people, then it turns into a riot, because it's going to get, it's that type of mentality. So being there and telling people, hey, this is how things work. This is your sink. This is the toilet that you can use. These are your tables. Don't walk in between these tables. Don't walk under this staircase. Make sure that if you're going to walk into somebody's cell, that you ask permission and you knock. It's like common basic courtesies to show respect to other people. That's a huge thing. It's just, if you're respectful. So I never had issues, but I saw all of the madness, dude. And it's just like, it's fucked up. And then there are situations where you see legitimately like bad people. Like, these people need to be in here. They shouldn't be on the streets. Like, I've seen people, and it's like, there's a look in some of these people's eyes that's like, dude, they're like, these motherfuckers are unstable. They will fucking kill you. Like, you can see it, dude. You can see it in some of these fucking people. So for me, I just kept my head down, did my program, worked out, played poker, didn't get myself into any trouble, and did my thing, but it was, you're in a cage, dude. You're in a cage and you have nothing. You have they don't teach. They took all trade skills out of prisons for a reason. You can't educate somebody and expect them to commit crime still after they've been educated and given a skill set, because they're going to go use their skill set. Why would they need to? Most people don't want to have to do what they're going to do to make ends meet if they have to do something that's fucked up, or if they have to commit crime. So, you know.
Yeah, I mean, the same economic system could be applied for actual rehabilitation, for actual programs, like you say, for re-education and for jobs programs. But there is such a stigma around felons, former criminals in America still. I mean, it's codified into a lot of the laws in terms of you lose your ability to vote and to participate in a system which is highly prejudicial. It spits in the face. I know a lot of people have issues with Finland and Norway and kind of their prison systems in terms of maximum labor, etc., and the conditions or whatever. But if you look at their recidivism rate, I can always struggle with that bloody word, the rate of which people repeat committing crimes, it's entirely a lot lower.
Yeah, it's a system that's built off of keeping people down instead of building people up. Because if you could still make a profitable business model that's based off of trades and education, but that's not how you keep people down. That's not how you maximize profitability. Institutionalized slave labor is a lot more profitable. And the whole thing is, when it comes to profitability in corporations, that's what the bottom line is. And I get it. I mean, I own a corporation, but I'm trying to do things and build systems that are beneficial, not detrimental.
Yeah, man. And again, I think there's a certain irony that the American prison system, for all it doesn't provide for reform, it does create quite a lot of people that come out with a kind of fuck you attitude, not in a malicious way necessarily, but in a, I will do this. I know what I want to do. You've left me in a room where all I've had is my thoughts, and I've decided what I want to do when I get out. You've, had granted limited access to library, etc. But there is a means where you can self-pursue education and that better life, even in such an abhorrent space. And I think it's kind of a test of character in some ways. But again, that's not to say that the people that get broken by that system are weak. That's not what I'm implying. It's another opportunity, I think, to create almost revolutionaries, which I would consider yourself almost to be in terms of what you've actually done with the ecology and what you're looking at with the system. So I suppose we'll move on from kind of this conversation of prisons to let's talk about legislations and kind of and the law, because obviously there's a lot we wanted to talk about here. So actually, yeah, what took you from San Diego to Oklahoma, if you don't mind me asking?
I wanted to work in the legal space. I was tired of going to prison, man. I'd been trapping for 18 years at that point, and I was like, man, I want to be able to like do something legal, even though I know this is all fake, fictitious, fucking made up, all these fucking stupid ass laws and shit. Um, but I wanted to participate and not have to fucking look behind my shoulder all the fucking time. And so the first opportunity that I had, because I got out of prison November 2018. I went to work for my buddy's flooring company, McKinney Hardwood Floors in Lakeside, California. Shout out to my boy Jake. And then I was working with them for like 6 or 8 months, and then my boy Dirty Harry was the guy that taught me how to grow weed. He had a place that he needed somebody to take it over because his partner was like failing. So I went in there, took it all over, got everything all going again, and I just started growing weed again, and I think that was in 2019, probably mid 2019. I got on like Instagram or something like that. Or no, I got on Instagram at the end of 2018. But when I started doing the cannabis stuff, I just started putting myself on blast. I was like, fuck it, man. I'm just gonna fucking see where I can go with this. I gotta get my name out there. I gotta, let people know what's up. And so I started doing Instagram or whatever, and I figured out like how to like make posts and stuff. And I was just doing educational posts and started talking to a couple of people that had a facility in Oklahoma that they were building. And eventually they were like, man, we need some help out here. Can you come out and check it out? And so I did. And I was like, they wanted me to move out here to Oklahoma to take over the cultivation. And so that's what I did. I told my partner, I was like, dude, I'm moving. I'm going to Oklahoma. I'm getting out of Cali. And then I got out here, and then I incorporated my Bokashi Earthworks business, which is my, it's my fertilizer distribution company. We manufacture microbes. We sell a bunch of other different stuff. I work with NASA Agricultural Technologies, and we manufacture soil and stuff. And I got that incorporated, got that on paper, and I started my agricultural consulting company. And when I got into the commercial space, I really started diving into the agronomy because I was already really, really into the organic side, biological inoculants. I understood all the microbiology side of how the system works. I really wanted to understand the chemistry, so taking it one level down into the microverse and see how things worked on a chemical level. And so that's basically what an agronomist is. An agronomist looks at soil and the chemical nature of soil and what is there available for the plant, and then understanding how much of what a plant will need for a certain crop. Let's say corn, you might need 240 pounds of nitrogen per acre to get adequate to have an adequate harvest. And so an agronomist basically looks at the soil nutrition from a chemical view, and then figures out what needs to be added into that system. A good agronomist will do it holistically and address it from a perspective of adding carbon and addressing it not just with conventional chemicals, but natural solutions that can bring up those target levels needed to maintain healthy crops and healthy soil fertility. We're looking for sufficiency and balance within that soil system. And so an agronomist is someone who basically looks at the data and decides what needs to be added into that system to maintain sufficiency and balance.
Okay. So could you tell us a little bit about the difference between sort of what you're doing with Bokashi and sort of traditional petrochemical fertilizers?
So most of the conventional fertilizers are just highly processed. So it's a highly energy intensive process. So it requires a lot of energy. And then most of the resources are in certain locales across the globe. Like if we were talking about cheap nitrogen, we're talking about China and Russia. Those are the cheapest sources of nitrogen. And nitrogen fertilizers come from the hardware process where they're extracting nitrogen from the gas, So if you have a place that is in turmoil and you're not going to be able to have global exports, the global exports decrease, then the price exponentially increases. That's why we're seeing food prices increase, because fertilizer prices are increased. In that way, there are certain areas of the world where we have different types of fertilizers, so they have to be imported for a large majority of them, regardless. And again, it comes down to really the efficiency, the energy, and then the use efficiency. So how much energy is it creating to make these products for ag? And then how much actual efficiency from the product do we get? Mm-hmm. If we were looking at a 10-10-10, just a complete fertilizer, 10% nitrogen, 10% phosphorus, 10% potassium. With a conventional fertilizer, maybe it's made out of diammonium phosphate, maybe some potassium sulfate as well. Diammonium, and maybe some dapper map, monoammonium, diammonium phosphate, and potassium sulfate. Let's say that's what it is. That's usually the base of like a 10-10-10 or synthetic fertilizer. Now, because of the highly reactive nature of the ions that are attached, what a salt is, I tell people so they don't get it misconstrued, but it's just a negatively positive molecule attached to a positively charged molecule. Excuse me. So you have a negative and a positive. They're covalently bonded together. Those molecules, they dissociate. Those ions dissociate in the presence of water, and then they're in a form that's available to the plant, but they're also highly reactive at that point. So they can bond with other elements that is either in solution or other elements that are in soil. So they lose the efficiency. If you have, a 10-10-10, only about 10% of that is going to stay in a form that's available to the plant. Mm-hmm. So you're going to lose 90% either to soil and other chemical reactions in soil, or to leaching. Mm-hmm. Of that nutrient. And then only 10% of that 10% is going to actually be observed, is going to come in contact with the root surface area of the plant. So we're looking at 10% divided by 10% divided by 2%. That leaves a nutrient use efficiency of 0.0002%. So it's very, very low. The amount of what we have to add and what makes it into the actual plant itself is very low. And you have to remember, the majority of what a plant is made out of is carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, right? It's not the nitrogen, the potassium, and the phosphorus. Well, a small percentage, like maybe 2% of a typical crop plant would be calcium, and then maybe 1 to 2% nitrogen, and then maybe 1% potassium, and then 0.5% of iron, and then it gets even, then only a couple ppms of micronutrients. So the amount of actual nutrient that's in a plant isn't that much. It's what those nutrients are actually doing internally, creating these complex carbohydrates, sugars, proteins, fats, made of mostly carbon and oxygen and hydrogen. Organic chemistry. It's building organic chemistry, and that organic carbon comes from the atmosphere. The hydrogen comes from water. So, it's I think I got off subject.
No, so you describing the sort of traditional compounds and their structure and function. So what is it that Bokashi do? What is it that yourself is sort of specializing in?
So when we're looking at the use efficiency of conventional fertilizers and the energy required to create them, it's very low. And then one other thing is, too, we're running out of phosphorus. We have about 60 years of phosphorus, but they just did currently find a phosphorus reserve that could potentially give us another 50 years, they estimate, but those are always grossly overestimated. So best chance scenario, 90 years that humans can continue with the population, simply because we won't have the efficiency of fertilizers. We're running out of phosphorus mineral that they make fertilizers out of. And so that's an issue. That's an issue too, because that will change the way the globe looks. I think that's probably one of the main reasons why there's a global push by these multinational organizations and these, trillionaire and billionaire, people that own everything. I think it's because they understand this is actually one of the biggest threats that we face globally. It's not global warming. It's phosphorus. It's phosphorus because we need phosphorus to grow crops. Only 2% of the actual land on the earth is sufficiently nutritious to grow commercial production of crops. Everything else has to have some type of remediation done, whether it's chemical or whether it's bio remediation. That's why we use fertilizers, because the land won't just grow it naturally. Mm-hmm. We would have to do something to it. We would have to be stewards of that land to make it productive. The difference between what we do is we have fertilizers that take those same types of elements, but we take them from mineralized organic matter in the form of lignite, which is millions of years ago. There's, these huge canopies across the earth. All this organic matter basically went back into the earth. It mineralized, and all of the nutrition that was stored in there, all that carbon that was stored in there, becomes like a mineral rock, right? It still contains amino acids, and it still contains phosphorus and iron and zinc and manganese and all these nutrients. And so you can take that, and then you can carbon chelate and make fertilizers, carbon-based fertilizers, or you can take green waste from industries like coffee or hemp biomass or tea waste or corn waste or anything like that. You can mulch it up and you can do a solid state ferment on it and turn it into a carbon-based fertilizer, to where basically all of that organic material is broken down by microbiology. It releases all the available fertilizer, and it stimulates the soil microbiome, because when you're using it, you're not just adding mineral elements, you're also adding in complex microorganisms, probiotic microorganisms, and you're also adding in carbon. And so the point of being able to reduce and improve the use efficiency of fertilizers is done through the addition of carbon, because there is a cycle that's carbon dependent on the amount of organic matter in the soil. That's nitrogen fixation and denitrification of soil, and then also phosphorus cycling, because phosphorus has to be enzymatically there's a couple different ways. In the phosphorus cycle, phosphate, the plant available anion that plants observe, the only form that plants can use, is liberated from phosphorus apatite material. So rocks that are in the soil. So if we have a bunch of micronized clay in soil, right, that contains phosphorus, unavailable phosphorus, microbes can solubilize the phosphate anion from that parent apatite material. But for them to proliferate and grow, they have to have a carbon source. So there needs to be organic matter that they can feed off of. Or they have to be photosynthetic, in which they can take in atmospheric carbon and convert that into those biological proteins and enzymes that degrade that parent apatite material, which liberates that phosphate anion, which not only the plants need, but the biology that's solubilizing it needs. Mm-hmm. So there is a process where chemical or environmental weathering causes the liberation of phosphate. But for the majority of plant use, the way that plant gets it is because it's dependent on microbiology. It's a biologically dependent system that allows for the proliferation and fixation of nitrogen and for the liberation of phosphate, and also for things like to keep iron available, to keep it from oxidizing in the presence of water, to keep it in its ferric form, which is the available form that plants need, most plants. You have to have these metabolites called sidiophores, which chelate them. They're carbon chelated mineral elements the plant has access to. These processes don't exist without carbon in the soil. So what we're doing is we're addressing it just from a chemical. We're addressing these things from a biological standpoint. So we have microbial inoculants and carbon-based fertilizers that are going to stimulate and enhance carbon. It's going to bring carbon into that system, which is going to enhance the microbiome. It's going to stimulate that microbiome to help create these nutrient cycling processes and these biologically dependent processes of nitrogen fixation, denitrification, nitrogen immobilization and mobilization, and phosphorus solubilization, iron chelation, silica, making silica available.
Okay, so it's
reducing sulfate. All of the processes are biologically dependent. And if we don't have soils that contain a certain amount of carbon in them, they go sterile. And then we're essentially growing in hydroponic media. And you've seen, like, I'm sure you guys have heard about the Oklahoma Dust Bowls. Maybe you haven't, I don't know. But there was, back in the 20s during the Great Depression, the soil fertility was wiped out. It was all just dust. There was no actual soil. It was dead. There was no organic matter, nothing to hold that soil together. There was no biofilms. There was no polysaccharide that were being produced by microorganisms that act as aggregates to glue soil particles together. There was just none of that stuff. So these things are really important. And so we're addressing agriculture from a holistic perspective. When we're not using pesticides, we're using biological solutions like entomopathogenic fungus, like Beauveria bassiana, which can both parasitize soft-bodied insects. It can also be a free-living soil microorganism where it's feeding off of decaying organic matter. It can also be a plant endophyte where it can live inside of the plant in exchange for carbon compounds. So it has all these different modes of action and different ways that it can procreate. And it's a plant, but it's used as insect pathogen because it causes white muscadine in insects. White muscadine disease, it sizes them.
So it is literally, as you're saying, it is a holistic systems approach. It is, rather than going, oh, it needs this, we'll add this. It's going, well, what can we do to better promote the organic creation of these compounds? And as you said, the far better efficiency of usage. So what's sort of the comparisons of an organic approach like this versus the traditional synthetics in terms of efficiency, etc.?
Think about so Dr. George, my mentor, he's the owner of NASA Agricultural Technologies. He was an engineer. He worked at NASA on the Apollo space project. He got into agriculture and engineering after he left, and he's been in agriculture ever since. Now, he's the one that developed the humate fertilizer. And the difference is that, sorry, what was the question again?
So what's the sort of comparatives in terms of efficiency
the comparatives.
Or like outcomes?
So I'm going to give a kind of a visual representation so people can understand. In hydroponic media, the reason why you have to constantly feed over and over instead of just feeding like maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks, in conventional ag, what you do usually is when the seed breaks the surface, you do your starter fertilizer. And then maybe like a month later, you might do another application depending on what that crop is. And then, so there's different timing and application is huge when it comes to cannabis, to any type of agronomy, corn, soy, cotton, it doesn't matter what it is. People use an agronomist and they have basically a fertigation plan that says for this crop, this is what you want to do. If you want to maximize your production, you want to maximize your quality, you want to maximize your yield, all of that, right? And so in hydroponics, let's take cannabis, for example, there's not like, oh, we're going to do this. It's like, here's our veg formulation, here's our bloom formulation, right? And we're constantly feeding over and over. So like, oh, we're applying this once, we're going to get results. It's constant and constant and constant. You have to constantly feed, and drain to waste is because those nutrients will react with each other. They have very low use efficiency. With something like the carbon-based fertilizer, like the humate fertilizer, you would only be maybe doing once or twice a month because the use efficiency is that much greater. We're talking about a 10% nutrient, 10 to 15% nutrient use efficiency, all the way up to a 95, 96% nutrient use efficiency. The difference is night and day, because the amount as far as pounds of something that you would have to put per acre. Let's say you get a soil test and you need to add in 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre into that soil. Okay, so how much, if I have something that's 13% nitrogen, how many pounds of that am I going to have? Okay, I'm going to need 2 tons of nitrogen, or so, I'm just throwing numbers. Okay, I'm going to need 2 tons of this stuff, because the use efficiency is so low, the majority of the plants aren't going to observe it. Now, if you take something like carbon-based, you're going to get a way greater nutrient use efficiency to where, oh, hey, I only need to do 50 pounds or 100 pounds. Okay. It's because it's observing all of what's being put there instead of being lost to chemical reactions and leaching.
So it's just, it's just an absolute maximization of the efficiency. Is it, obviously you're saying you produce it yourself from lignin, but is it quite more decentralized? You were speaking before of obviously phosphorus sites around the world and whatever else, but in terms of this system, is it more decentralized?
So this is what can be done. So you can take the pure forms of any of those ions. Let's say if it was potassium, that would be potassium hydroxide. That's pure potassium. Acids of potassium. Actually, it wouldn't be an acid, it would be a base. It's an alkali. It's a pure alkali of potassium. And it's just basically potassium ions. Now, they're super highly reactive. So you can't just go and put potassium hydroxide as a fertilizer, because it would fucking kill everything, just because it would wreck that system, wreak havoc. But if you were to carbon chelate that, it doesn't react anymore. It stays in a metabolically available form that can be used by biology and by the plant. It's being held by carbon in the soil. So it reduces the leaching. It reduces any of the negative impacts that these things have versus what a conventional does, Yeah. There's all negative consequences. Yes, both products do the same thing. They grow crops, but one of them has a lot more detrimental side effects. One of them doesn't have any detrimental side effects.
Yeah. Like I said, the fact of shipping around vast quantities of, compounds to facilitate the production of foods to sustain different areas.
That's not going to change, though. No, that's not going to change, though, because here's the thing. We're limited on the availability of resources depending on where you are. Like if we need 17 different elements for plant growth, what is the easiest path to creating something that is going to allow us to fertilize at scale so we don't have to kill off billions of fucking people to make a fucking statement or whatever it is that these people are fucking doing. Like, how can we continue to grow but not deplete our soils, still have highly nutritious food? Because that's the problem too, is that conventionally grown NPK fertilizers don't contain any of the macronutrients and secondary nutrients that we also need, or they don't contain the amino acids and the carbohydrates. So the food is less dense. When we're addressing these issues, man, using things like microbes that can help build soils and soyabilize what's already in soil, making things more bioavailable to the plant, it doesn't have a negative impact. Using inoculants, those are beneficial to the soil. Chemicals, not you can reduce the use of chemicals if you were able to increase the amount of carbon holding capacity, because then you're not losing things to leaching. You can have chelation of those elements that are putting into that system. So you'd be using far less. But that's not the approach that conventional agriculture has taken. It's all about that carbon. Carbon is what is proliferating new soils, it's proliferating the microbiomes, it's proliferating life.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the difference.
Yeah.
The difference between carbon-based fertilizers, organic fertilizers, an agronomist who takes a holistic approach versus conventional is just that. We're looking at it in introducing all of the things we can do. But again, we were talking about the shipping and stuff like that. Like Morocco has huge reserves of phosphorus. That's where a lot of the phosphorus comes from. We can't that's not going to change. That's the only there's only certain places where certain things exist in large enough quantities that we can just pull them out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still going to take energy. It's still going to take energy. It's still going to take resources, whether it's diesel or gasoline. Like it's not like this isn't just a one-stop solution unless you're sitting down with an engineer and going, okay, we're going to build out a system. Where's the lignite located? Okay, we have a bunch in North Dakota. Okay, we're going to make a huge farm in North Dakota so we can take the lignite directly from the land, and then we can put our factory on there. It's a green factory, doesn't create waste. We can make our fertilizers there, and then we can start bioremediating all the area around that, wherever it is, hundreds or thousands of miles around that, starting out, whatever it is. Let's keep building out from these locations. And then with the agriculture waste, what are we doing with all ag waste? Oh, we're doing solid state fermentation. We're all recycling all green waste that's produced on the farm and all green waste that's produced by society. We're putting it back where it's going back to where it came from. It's getting turned into biofertilizer so that we can keep that process. I mean, unless you're going to design out a complete holistic system where you're doing bioremediation to the land first, you have all of the resources that you have right on site and you can scale it out huge. And we're talking about all of the resources, because if your soil doesn't have copper in it, it doesn't matter how much microbes you put in there. Copper is not going to appear. You're going to have to get it from somewhere, right? There's like a misconception that like soils can just magically produce things that aren't there by adding, like you can take plant ferments and do stuff like that, but how scalable, like the labor, like it's mind-boggling. The labor, the logistics, like you would have to have the greatest minds of all time sit down, engineer. We're going to need agronomists. We're going to need engineers. We're going to need mechanical engineers. We're going to need civil engineers. We're going to need chemical engineers. We're going to need agronomists. We're going to need soil biologists. We're going to need farmers. We're going to need farm work. It would take a massive, massive effort to create a holistic ag system, which can be done. I mean, I've thought about it plenty of times. But if we, again, 2% of our land, only 2%, means 98% of the Earth's land isn't suitable for ag. So something has to be done. Resources will have to be allocated. Energy will have to be spent. It's all about the efficiencies that we can create, whether it's resources in energy, resources in conservation, resources in use efficiency. It's all about the efficiency of energy. And the plant does the same thing. It's one of the reasons why we bottom prune plants. Because why are we going to feed something that's not going to generate output? We're going to have input. We have our throughput. There's no output.
Yeah. Okay. It might be a stupid question. I am not trained in the field, as this question may show my ignorance. Is it possible to use carbon capture to develop the carbon I can't remember the process you called it, to basically to coat those elements in the soil as you were describing before?
I'm sure that there's a way. Again, engineers, chemical, civil, mechanical engineers, they all got to knock their heads together and they have to be motivated to be able to create change. We know that you can, like Dr. George talks about all the time, you can use pure carboxylic acids to capture carbon and to capture emissions, other things like nitrogen gases, sulfides, other things that are burned during the burning, or that are released during the burning of fossil fuels and other things, and they can be encapsulated and carbon chelated into different types of products. So there is a possibility to do it, but who's implementing it, who's actively seeking it, and the only way that someone will is if there's profitability in it. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, man, because if someone's like, oh shit, we can get carbon credits for this, then they might be on board. And they're like, okay, yeah, we're going to do this. Now we're getting fucking tax credit. And here's the thing. If you were creating a holistic ag system, you can create tax credits because you can figure out how much carbon you're sequestering as far as atmospheric carbon that's being put into the soil. And then you can also figure out how much of that biomass is also going back into the soil. So we're generating this much biomass. The biomass is generated through the carbon dioxide. That's what the carbon is, the majority of the carbon that's in that plant. And so we're taking atmospheric carbon, we're converting it into biomass. That biomass is then being sunk into the soil. Okay, so if I'm generating a crop yield of, let's say 1,000, I'm just throwing out a number. Let's say we're doing, 6,000 pounds of biomass on an acre, right? 3,000 of that biomass is waste. Okay, we can calculate 3,000 pounds of carbon, that's 85% carbon is going in there. We can make a calculation to figure out how much carbon we just sequestered. And then how much did that crop actually sequester while it was growing? Because 85% of the plant carbon that it creates, complex sugars, amino acids, enzymes, proteins, are exuded through root exudation. 15% are redirected back into soil to proliferate soil biology, to change and manipulate that soil microbiome so it can observe the things that it needs. Decreasing pH through the production by dumping hydrogen protons, so it can get access to iron or other nutrients that are more soluble at lower pHs. Those are types of modes of action that the plant will take, and it'll either dump elements like hydrogen, or it'll release oxidative or enzymes or reductive enzymes. All different crazy compounds the plant releases to regulate its root environment.
I think. Sorry, go on.
Go ahead.
I was going to say that I think you hit the nail on the head with motivated when you said it before. Unfortunately, under the capitalist paradigm of neoliberalism, it is seen that profit is the only motivation. But I mean, if central governments through taxation mechanisms, instead of like carbon credits and all these, when you want to believe in this 15-minute city concept, or like we have a whole thing in the UK at the minute of like ultra low emission zones, where basically you charge like up to £12, £15 a day to drive in the city you live in. And it's the approach.
They shouldn't have to do that. Here's the thing. We are taxed to death. Look, I think our tax when we left the English Union or whatever the hell it was like 3%, man. 3%. King George had a 3% tax. That's what we had a revolution over, right? Now, dude, corporate tax is like 50%, and then you're going to pay probably 8 to 10% tax on anything you buy after that. Like your income is taxed. Like we're taxed to fucking death. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. It's not that there's not enough tax for governments to do it. It's just that politicians are lining their own pockets. They should be allowed to do stock trading. That will solve the problem. No more stock trading if you're in the Senate or if you're in Congress or if you're in a position to make legislation, like state and local legislators. They shouldn't be able to hold stock options. That'll change the whole system, right?
Yeah, and there is a bill, if I'm correct, or there was one proposed. I don't know if it's actually moved into the Senate for exactly this, to address this mechanism. Because who is it you have? Is it Nancy Pelosi? And her husband, is it Paul Pelosi? And he has a statistical better hit rate in terms of stock returns than I think is it Aladdin, BlackRock's supercomputer?
Yeah. They're like it's all insider trading and stuff. They look
Mm.
at the whole thing in politics now, like even at the state and local level, is this, the people that are there to pursue business advantages so they can write and create legislation that's going to be advantageous to what they are pursuing. They don't give a shit about other businesses or anybody else. The only representation that cannabis sees are from big business. There's no representation for small mom and pop businesses because all the mom and pops are fucking busting their ass fucking working. They can't go to the Capitol and talk to these people and show up and show out, 3-4 days a week until they get their fucking message across to these people. It's why lobbyists do what they do. They stand in the lobbies and they wait until they can. Oh, you're out of a meeting, and they talk to these people and they say, hey, here's some tickets. This is what we want to do. Blah, 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 blah. You know how it works, dude. It's just a pay to play. That's all they're doing over there. And so people need to be more involved in civics. They need to be more active in their local politics because it starts locally. You have to hold local people accountable. And then again, all this shenanigans with insider trading and shit is a problem. It's a big problem.
Yeah, 100%, man. I think this leads on beautifully to sort of conversations about sort of the legislation. So obviously the US, because it has these kind of systems where citizen-led initiatives and citizens can actually like hold their political leaders accountable, relatively so in comparison to a lot of the world, and I would say including here in little old England in the UK. But this has led to then a patchwork of really different evolving state legislation that is allowing for the so-called, I like quote, legalization of cannabis. You've obviously, I suppose, given your time, lived under two jurisdictions. What are your thoughts on the nature of states' sort of rights and the impending kind of federal legalization?
Well, rescheduling would just absolutely ruin everything. It would make it so that you couldn't have home grow. It would decimate fucking markets. It would wreak havoc. But essentially, Odom Chow, order through chaos. The people who are in charge of creating chaos are usually the ones that come out and are able to manipulate the system in their favor. And so I wouldn't be surprised if that is the approach that's taken because it has worked in the past. If again, though, it comes to the involvement, how much attention people want to pay to this. People are so distracted with all of the bullshit that doesn't even fucking matter. This is a big problem because I work in cannabis. I work with hundreds and hundreds of different farms. It's a travesty. It all comes down to lack of education, civics, and getting involved with government. Here in Oklahoma, just like every other state, at a local level, they'll implement it. We had a great program, but it's slowly being torn apart by the legislative body. They're constantly attacking us with new regulation and taxes. And that's their whole idea. It's been stated, it's on the record in the floor that we have 7,000 grows currently, maybe a little less than that, but they want less than 1,000. And they've said that on record that they want to basically decimate the small cannabis community. They want to decimate small businesses. They want to eliminate the potential for people to continue to operate unless the state is getting the maximum amount of profitability. And the people who are running the state are lining their own fucking pockets and their friends' pockets with money. They just keep taxing and taxing and taxing. And it happens in every state. It doesn't matter if you're in California, which is a complete shit show. It doesn't matter if you're in Oklahoma or Michigan or New York. It's all going to become a shit show because they want it to become a shit show because the whole fucking point is to create chaos so they can manipulate the system, maximum profit for them. If they can shut down home grow and they can say, we're going to come and fucking threaten you and arrest you and send you to prison with killers, violent criminals, we're going to make you into a violent criminal. We're going to take away your property. We're going to take away your rights. We're going to decimate your family. What are people going to do? I mean, we have guns in America. So if it really came down to it, people have the ability to fight back.
I think it's such an interesting one. I mean, from what I've read on it, I'm writing my latest Weed World article about. I've basically titled it "The Establishment is Lying to You," and it was going to be sort of titled on discussing how legalization, the idea of it, has been captured and co-opted by vested interest and capitalists to create, exactly as you're saying, these systems of maximum criminalization on one side, but maximum profitability on the other, and that they get to dictate the rules and the regulations in any given sort of sector. It's interesting to watch the states from the outside and to see each state come on board with different things. And then as time goes on, to watch, as you say, them get underpinned. I know there was a draft bill, I'm not sure if it made it to the House in Oregon, that was basically stating they wanted 10 years if people locked up if they grew 100 plants or more. And the increasing of criminalization in these regions under legalization, air quotes legalization, it's a misnomer. They've misunderstood what we wanted. If they truly end the criminalization of cannabis, there isn't a black market. There isn't a competition for them. Cannabis becomes a crop like anything else, and it's classed. So that you buy an onion at class 1 or class 2. I don't know even if there is a class 3, but then that's a typical. It's got to meet certain requirements for market, have certain track and traceability, but then anybody can supply into those markets. And that's what is missing with cannabis. They're trying to create something so special out of it and restrict that control because it is a truly decentralized resource. A seed, you know what I mean, from a tiny little cut can turn you into a billionaire. It's so self-replicating of a material. And if you know your craft and your skill, it doesn't matter how much corrupt investment you bring in or how many politicians you bribe. People will still go to quality. They will still respect legacy, and they will still want to support the people that actually got us to where we are, because that's something legalization forgets. It whitewashes. It seeks to erase everything that happened up to that point. And these people get to stand there, like the mayor of New York mayor, and fucking, oh, I've got a bag of weed, and play into this pomposity and this pageantry, while prohibition still very physically exists. If you carry too much, you grow too much, you carry it. Look, in Canada, they still haven't codified where you carry it in your vehicle. So in some fucking territories, you can be done for possession if you put it in the wrong, if it's accessible in your car, because it counts as an open container. There's all sorts of nuance and systems where they still want to prop up that for-profit prison system, as you say, but they want the kudos and to be, we're the cool kids. You know, we legalized marijuana. And it's like, you've missed the fucking point.
They didn't do anything. All they did was they stole the last, like what I view as one of the last tax-free commodities that you could. The whole thing with cannabis too was about freedom and self-sufficiency, because you don't need government. You don't need anybody if you can produce everything on your own. If you can grow your own food, produce your own energy, if you have access to clean water, you don't need government. You don't need anybody. You can be self-sufficient. You can live independently or collectively with groups of people. And government only exists if we allow it to. It's through the fact that not being self-sufficient and self-reliant that we give corporations and governments power. I think, for me, the reason why I love cannabis and cultivating so much, especially in the black market, was because it gave me freedom, in a sense that nobody was going to dictate what I was going to do. I could create my own product. I could sell my own product. Nobody was going to take from me anything that I had earned or worked for. They weren't going to tax me. Income tax you just to work. We're gonna take from you because you want to work. That doesn't even fucking make sense. So it was the last vestige of freedom as far as the agricultural crop, a medicine. It gave you self-sufficiency, independence, bartering power. All of those things which the government doesn't want you to have. We don't have lawful money anymore. We have legal tender. We don't have a barter system even. We just have mostly a debt system in place. So
it's as you said, it's an extension of that control paradigm. So do you think then this recommendation, obviously it came from the Health and Human Services Department, or rather it was a leaked letter from the HHS to the DEA. I think it was Bloomberg reported on it initially. Obviously that's blown up in various circles, and your more corporate captured cannabis media, we know there's several of them around. We're not going to name them don't want to get myself in too much trouble, but there's quite a few of them around that have reported on this in such an extreme positive way, and they have whitewashed and completely missed over several key issues. One of the things that I'm still trying to understand, perhaps you may know yourself, states' rights. How would that work in terms of federal legislation? Is it possible that then if it becomes Schedule 3 alongside ketamine, steroids, thank you, then would the states be able to go, yeah, that's federal legislation, but the states' rights, we're going to say, I can't remember which amendment is, but there is an amendment of states' rights.
What is the state? What makes up the state? The state is a collection of the people? Not really. It's just the people that represent what the people want, but that's not usually what happens. So I imagine that with rescheduling, it'll probably create some type of environment where the people who want to take advantage of the situation will take advantage of the situation with no thought or forethought to what will happen to small businesses or the farmers or anything else. That's usually how it works, right? Why would they reschedule anyway? Is it like, hey, we're going to just reschedule this and then you guys figure it out? Or it's like, no, we're rescheduling this so that way we can create an active campaign with the DEA and the ATF so we can come after people, so we can increase our grip with the prison industry complex, so we can take more control from an agricultural standpoint, so that way we can make sure that people cannot produce and be self-sufficient and have small businesses. I mean, because that's what it seems like is happening. It just seems like everything is being consolidated into one giant thing, so that way everybody has to become reliant on this one giant thing, and self-sufficiency in education, in agriculture, in medicine, in, family values and all that are just completely degraded into one melting pot of corporate government.
It's a homogenizing of the system. It's a denial of the individual experience. It's, exactly as you said, the governments are supposed to be collective representatives of the will of the people. Yeah, I'm now 35 and I have never felt represented in my life. I have not seen a single political individual. I was maybe Corbyn for a while, and still had issues with some of his foreign policy and other things. But generally speaking, they don't represent the will of the people. Again, it's a fallacy to look at it of going, the prohibition we know under since the mid-90s was the Ehrlichman quote came out, where he was Nixon's advisor on drugs, and he basically gave the whole gameplay away and said exactly what we were doing. The racist, classist codifying of the war on drugs was to target certain subcultures and groups. And they've done that so well, and they've huffed from their own bag of bullshit that they got high on their own supply, created so restricted of the regulations that now they almost need that as the only ladder out. So they're pitching it as going, no, it has to be a medicine first, then the labs and the doctors, then this. But we know capitalism, it will not allow it to go to that second or third system. The idealist people like Chuck Schumer or whoever that have been pushing, the Banking Safe Reform Act and all the other nuanced little bits, they can't see beyond what they can see. Like, same as anybody else, we're limited to our perspective, but this is why you have to listen to the people you're supposed to be representing. Where is the cannabis culture actually being represented? It's chads, it's corporate lobbyists, it's individuals that don't consume cannabis, but are here to dictate what our culture is. It is this abhorrent system where we are being gaslit at every point and told, no, you're not allowed. I don't care if you've been doing it for 30 years, 40. No, you're not allowed it. This kid's got a degree from university and he's in the legal space, so he's going to do it. And it's this nepotism, this corruption that we're seeing where it's jobs for the boys on one side, but if you didn't go to the right school, you don't know the right guy, you didn't have the right connection, or you're associated to somebody they don't like, you're not allowed to get off the starting blocks. The licensing, the taxing systems, as you said, make it so restrictive. It's like $2 million just to get off the bat in California. It's a mom and pop. You can't do that. You can't raise that kind of equity and get a system in place where you can actually create a profitable business. And most of us in the space, yeah, we want profit is in to live well and to expand, but we don't want to take over the fucking world. We don't want to viciously destroy our competition. There is no such thing as competition in cannabis right now, and there won't be for another 20, 30 years. We're still page 1, sentence 1. This tome, this Bible of cannabis is fucking 1,000 pages long. We need to be humble and recognize and go, all right, you got a good idea. You got a good idea. As you said before, get them together and figure this shit out. We should be celebrating cannabis as this ultimate global resource that could bring humanity together, far beyond just us enjoying it as a drug and as an opium alternative, as a treatment for fucking cancer and a various other plethora of conditions, as a carbon sequestration technology, creating batteries and supercapacitors, an ethanol alternative, a plastic alternative, a remediation tool, as you were saying. Like there is so much more to this that if we can just get past the hangover of the war on drugs and their rhetoric, we just need them to recognize they're not the ones to lead us through this. They should step back and do exactly what happened with the gay rights movement. Nothing about us without us. You cannot claim to represent the cannabis culture if you're not from it. If you were not someone that clandestinely grew, that dealt, that interacted, that consumed, that in some way supported that ecosystem when it was the height of prohibition, then frankly, I believe you don't deserve to profit from it. You can come in second or third. You can invest in somebody, but you don't deserve to get to play with the plant every day and have that freedom and that access. You don't get to post your little selfies in your crops and your gardens and play like the cool kid, while the people that give you the tools and the skills that you are fucking exploiting are still in prison. The system is still fucked. I mean, there's still, I don't know how many, it was 50 last time I checked, but I think there's been a few lifers have come out of federal prisoners that are serving life sentences for non-violent cannabis offenses in the US. And they're talking about rescheduling and all this shit. Where is expungement in that? Where is the social justice? Where is okay, Curaleaf, you can exist with 109 fucking outlets or whatever it is, but we're going to tax the living fuck out of you for every additional one you add. There should be a higher level of bracket, not a lower one. We shouldn't be allowing monopoly. We should be allowing autonomous utility. I don't want to travel around the world and smoke the same fucking weed in every place. I want to find the local flavor, the local variety and heirlooms and landrace. I want to experience the cannabis culture that they have propagated, that they have protected in the face of prohibition. That's what I want to experience, true, raw, authentic cannabis culture. I don't want this whitewashed bullshit and this erasure of the culture that I love, that has given me my life, that has given me purpose. That's what I see legalization is it's this erasure of the culture, and it's taking a product that is already lawful around the world and creating legal restrictions. Cannabis isn't illegal anywhere. It's humans that are restricted. You can't criminalize an object. So they've tricked us into this thing of going, the only way we can get the plant back is to ask them to create legal regulations to restrict us further. That's not an end of criminalization to me. That's, as Jody Emery put it, that's Prohibition 2.0. That is just the next iteration. It's corporate capture, so they get to make all their money and still get to lock up. Oh, he's a funny shade. We don't like him. Oh, he's in the wrong area. Oh, we don't like where she's been brought up or whatever. And whatever bullshit they get to use as an arbitrary point of criminalization. We have to free everyone. No one should be allowed to operate at the levels that some of these producers are, that are now becoming global conglomerates, when the markets that they're exporting into and making money from are still locking up people.
Yep. It's twisted. It's a twisted system. It takes people collectively to change. The strength is in the number. You have to get people to actively participate, to actively get involved, and to stand up. If we can't hold people accountable, that represent us, nothing will change. That's the biggest part of it. We have to have accountability.
100%. 100%. So do you think this is I have seen quite a lot, and it's been really heartening to watch a lot of activists, and especially sort of legacy people I've followed for a decade plus in the space in America, kind of come out and go, no, if we're going to do anything, we should deschedule it. Let's regulate cannabis like alcohol and tobacco. That's the only rational sort of thing to do. So do you think there is going to be this sort of renaissance or a call for like decriminalization, descheduling of alternative actions to federal legalization, or let's call it medicinalization of cannabis, because effectively that's what it is.
The way that I feel is that even if there was a huge rally, all of these things can now be suppressed. They can suppress the media, they can suppress social feeds, they can suppress any type of information. So the question is, does it matter, or can we do it organically without using the tools that have been put in place to suppress us?
Yeah.
We have to have, people that are talking to people physically, having conversations, saying, hey, this is what's going on. We need to do something about this. Rallying, the rally cry is great, but yelling at the top of your lungs doesn't actually solve problems. Action solves problems. Formulating a plan of how to go about changing a system that is broken, and then implementing those changes collectively with the people that are supporting you. I see no other way other than people actively coming together. They have to actively share. They have to actively show up and show out and to get it done. That's going to be that's how it's going to get done. I hope that we can have things move in a more positive direction for small businesses, and I hope that we can get less taxes and less regulations, less government. Less government is good government. But again, it's all about how collectively we come together and push. So all it comes down to how, what strength in numbers, being able to get the job done. Because these other people have worked pretty hard to get themselves in positions of control and power, and they don't want to relinquish power. They'll use their friends and allies that they've made, because power begets power. They want to collectively, but there's a lot of people that aren't actively seeking power, so it's hard to get people who aren't actively seeking power to try to take control. So it's kind of like a paradox. It's like, we don't want control, so we're going to have to seek control. We're going to have to go and control these people who are saying that they represent us or represent our interests when they clearly don't.
Yeah, I mean, if they're not talking to us, how can they know what our interests are in order to represent them? So I suppose I've got the last just three relatively quick fire questions. What does your ideal model look like? What would be sort of the perfect framework if Biden rang you tomorrow and went, Brandon, I'm done. I need it. I need it dealt with. Right. Whatever you pen down, we'll do.
I'd probably tell him that he should incarcerate his whole entire cabinet. I think the solution is to just absolutely decriminalize. There probably needs to be an act that says that anybody who produces their own wares on their own land is not liable to pay taxes, can't be regulated. All regulations exist under the guise of safety, and I can understand why we need some safety measures or standards, but that comes with education, not enforcement. Like, it comes with, hey, like, you shouldn't eat rotten meat because it can make you sick and it has these parasites and it can cause this, this, and this. Not, hey, you can't sell this, because I understand consumer safety, but let's replace consumer safety, the idea of consumer safety, with consumer education.
Mm-hmm.
Because oftentimes legislation is written under the guise of protecting, and that's not the way that it actually works. It's really there to regulate and to control. It all comes down to control and regulation. It's like, I don't fucking get it. I don't want to control and regulate everything. I just want to be able to be independent and self-sufficient. I want to be able to provide for my family. I don't want to be taxed, and I don't want to have some type of authoritarian figure always looming over me, telling me what I should be thinking or how I should behave or how I should act. Or I come from I believe that I have a good, strong set of moral values, both in business and my personal life. And I just don't need all the other bullshit,
Yeah, I think that would be my kind of wish over here as a general sense as well. I want cannabis to be a carrot, to be a tomato. Heinz is not threatened by me if I make my own ketchup at home. Do you know what I mean? Budweiser's a bad choice. A different beer brand is not fucking fearful of the homebrew market because they've already got such a size of the market. Cannabis is gonna out eclipse everything else once it's truly unrestricted and people are allowed to grow one plant and use it for a myriad of different functions. Its accessibility is
dynamic in society. If you think about it, though, it does have the potential to change because it alters consciousness, and that can also alter everything else as a domino effect. If we're thinking about the things that you mentioned before, sustainability, bioremediation, plastics, fuels, clothing, building materials, all of those things are all capable, but those are all part of industries, huge industries that in some cases have existed for hundreds of years that have been completely monopolized. And again, it all comes to control. So got to free it up. We got to make everything. We need our freedoms back.
100%. I think cannabis is, as one of my friends calls it, it is a capitalist resource with a socialist agenda. And the capitalists will commodify cannabis, but along the way, it will change the culture because, as you say, consuming cannabis causes metacognition, introspection. You sit and start to think about how you think. You start to think about the society you live in, the world you want to live in, how you want to participate in it. The fairness, the equity of the systems that you are, forced to live under. And I think that's the single most dangerous aspect of cannabis for the establishment, is people becoming autonomous, shaking off the programming, the fear, the indoctrination of the system through its, standardized education system, through mass marketing and media, through films, TV, literature, everything. There's this constant regurgitation and repetition until you are hypnotized by it. Whereas you smoke a fat joint and you go, why the fuck am I working for minimum wage for this dickhead? And you start to question your reality and go, actually, you know what, love? We should probably, we'll get off grid. We'll get some chickens. We'll do whatever, you start to have these, some call them pipe dreams or whatever, but you start to have more aspiration outside of the confines of that system. And that's dangerous. We can't have the lower classes thinking that they could have what the upper classes could have. The whole system would crumble. So I think there's an inevitability.
But in reality, the upper classes, what do they actually have other than control over a fictitious system, right? Because as soon as people turn their backs on that system, they no longer have anything. Because are they self-sufficient? Are they growing their own chickens? They might have access to resources, but they couldn't physically go and produce their own food. They couldn't physically go and do construct their own house. That's my type of thinking, because again, self-sufficiency is the basis of independence, and without self-sufficiency, you cannot have freedom, because you're going to be reliant, and we all are. And I don't know how to generate power. All that technology information that's pretty much been suppressed. I can go and get an alternator and make a windmill and do some stuff like that, but it's not going to do what a conventional power grid does.
There is a guy I would like to introduce you to who I'm not going to reveal what he does. I'll send you a message about it afterwards, but he works within sort of energy production in the cannabis space. And I think you guys could have sort of very interesting conversation. I think he could give you some insight into, because again, it's green, like upcycled systems. It's completely reusing waste to produce energy from cannabis cultivation. So I made a note to connect you guys. But yeah, I think it's something I found out with the schooling that I went through when I was younger was the things that I wanted to know was, can I build a fire? How can I sleep outside? How can I, forage food? How can I, if the worst came to it, I used to love horror movies as a kid, zombie movies, whatever. And my dream was, societal collapse. I know what I'm doing. I do a lot of wild camping. I can build shelters. I can filter water. I'm pretty self-sufficient with those skills. And it is that thing of, the only thing that I am lacking really is the finance. And it's like when you load up a new game and you're putting up the stats bars. And so all the elite have really is they've maxed out their cash bar. But do you think they could make a fire? They would pay somebody to make a fire. But what happens when the systems collapse, especially now since it's all digital currencies? We're one solar flare away from them fuckers being exactly where we are in that kind of forced parity. So I think, like I said, there is this inevitability almost that the harder they commodify cannabis, we will ink small little victories along the way until eventually it changes societally. If it takes another 2-3 generations, when eventually the kids that grew up under the normalization of cannabis were like, well, why are these rules still in place? And eventually become the legislators or start to hold them accountable to make these changes. I mean, obviously my hope is that we can get consensus globally around this idea of descheduling and decriminalizing. There is one act, well, there's 3 acts really, 1998, 1971, and 1961 conventions under the UN that caused all of this shit. Every single national drugs policy is based on these things, America being one of the biggest proponents of this. So there's almost an emphasis that if the states are to do anything, come back to the fucking UN and go, these are wrong. There's something wrong fundamentally with the idea of restricting a plant. I mean, fuck, I could grow tomatoes and produce cyanide from the leaves and have access to a poison. Does that mean we're regulating tomato production because I could do that? No. In the same way that cultivating cannabis, it could be for a myriad of other uses. It's THCA, it's a non-psychoactive until I act upon it to turn it into a drug. So with other laws, the emphasis is that you can have access to do things. You can buy knives. Do you know what I mean? You can go on the street and stab people. Don't. You shouldn't. I'm not condoning violence. What I'm saying is you have the physical capability to do that. They haven't restricted all knives. And I just want that for cannabis, is that it's just a thing and it's our intention and our action that not necessarily needs regulating, but needs recognizing. And that's what should be protected here. I don't care about corporate profits, interstate dispensaries and production and whatever other fucking patents and intellectual property. I care about the liberation of the individual to cultivate their own, consume their own, and develop a relationship with this fucking plant. It's got an intelligence to it without sounding too fucking hippy-dippy or pseudo-scientific. But there's a spirit to it. There is something to it. It's softened me over the years. Jesus Christ. I used to be a horrible youth. And then cannabis over the years, especially then cultivating it and developing that relationship with it, it's changed my life. And I've watched it change countless lives around me for the better. And I just want to see that unbridled, unrestricted, what this plant can give back to humanity.
Yep, I feel the same. We've been on for a little bit. I'm getting hungry and I have some more work to do. So
can I wrap up with my final question?
Yeah. What do you got?
Same question I ask everybody, which is, what does the future hold for you?
I'm hoping that we get all of this. This is the NutriPot. So it's a fully compostable pot that is going to be a replacement for single-use plastics and fertilizer. So you just plant your plant or your seedling into this and you can put it directly into the ground. It will decompose, releasing carbon and all the mineral nutrients that the plant needs for growth. And so the idea is to be able to take this to nurseries and all the different types of places like Walmart and Home Depot and any place that has potted plants that use the single-use plastics and then replace it with this. So that way you can get something, not generate trash, and then you're going to be able to deliver the fertilizer and the carbon. So you're going to stimulate soil biology. You're going to get the plant the minerals that mineral nutrition it needs, and you don't have to go through transplant shock, and then you don't have to fertilize after you planted. So that's one of the things that I'm hoping for. But other than that, I just hoping to keep expanding the Bokashi Earthworks business to make it so other people have access to carbon-based fertilizers, microbial inoculants, integrated pest management tools that are biological instead of chemical in nature. That's what we're working on. We're working on, transitioning, not just being in cannabis, but into, conventional agriculture, and transitioning into these farms that are using synthetic chemicals, really low nutrient use chemicals that have a detrimental impact, and then implementing new practices that can help bioremediate, build soil carbon while fertilizing, and implementing sustainable agricultural practices.
Okay.
That's what we're working on. Hopefully, I know we'll be able to do it. We've got good people, and just a matter of time to everything's been builds up slowly, and businesses they build over time, and as we're able to show people how these things work and the functionality and the science behind them and everything.
No, I think you've got some brilliant products. I think it's a very noble thing that you're doing. Obviously, there is the profit and everything else in it, but in terms of the ethos behind it, it's something we need more of within this space, because cannabis currently is so fucking wasteful under lawful commercial production.
Yep. That's one of the things that I do with my other company, which is my consulting company, is we look at the cost of production and how we can decrease the overhead, how we can decrease waste. And again, a lot of it's people who are doing big hydroponic commercial production can really benefit from doing soil systems, carbon-based fertilizers. They're less energy to maintain, less labor intensive. They're a little easier to operate, in my opinion, more cost effective to operate. And when we're talking about cost efficiency, we're talking about labor, electricity, nutrient use, water use, all that stuff.
Okay. Excellent. Well, yeah, I'll include links below to your Instagram and whatnot, and relevant links for things that we've spoke about. I'll let yourself get off and get some food, brother. It's been a pleasure and a privilege. I've really enjoyed this chat, and I feel I've actually learned quite a bit. So appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me on. It was a good conversation. I hope that we can reach a lot of people, and I'll definitely let people know where they can listen.
Excellent. Yeah, well, I'll send you a link when it's done. But yeah, I'll let you sign off. I'll do some housekeeping, and I'll speak to you soon, brother. Take it easy.
Soon. Have a good one.
All right, peace. Bye. Well, there you go, folks. That was Brandon Rust. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I hope you weren't too distracted by how gradually greasy my forehead has got with how warm it is in this little hotbox studio of mine. Yeah, I felt I learned a lot there. There's some things I maybe didn't quite grasp, so I'm going to go away and do a bit of learning. I'll include some links to some materials below as well to help aid in sort of just integrating kind of a lot of the things that Brandon had to sort of teach us there about agronomy, I guess, or as an agronomist, and sort of microbiology and sort of building soils, etc. I thought there was a lot of valuable information in there. Had some really good philosophical conversations sort of about legal systems. It was great. Really appreciate him sharing his insight into the prison system in America and his experiences. I think it does a lot to shed light on it. I just want to quickly sort of touch base a bit more on the rescheduling thing, because it's something I didn't quite get into. obviously, the letter from the HHS to the DEA is basically stating that they recommend the federal government in the US reschedule cannabis as Schedule 3, putting it alongside anabolic, I can't say it, damn it, steroids and ketamine, and various other sort of drugs that are in Schedule 3 in the US. But what this means is no one can produce their own Schedule 3 drug. It is entirely then becoming a medicinalized substance compound, so it's only recognized within the field of modern pharmacology. So it would be modern pharmaceutical companies and people within sort of that level of establishment that would then control and govern cannabis federally in the US. Obviously, as I said, there is this issue with, I believe it's one of the amendments, I'm not going to quote it because I don't want to get it wrong, that basically protects states' rights. I think it's named after somebody, but I'm trying to read something in my head and I can't quite get there fast enough. But yeah, this mechanism anyway, I'm not sure what's happening. I'm doing the research, trying to figure out what it means as to whether, as we asked Brandon there, as to whether there can be a rejection at the state level of this. So there could still be the so-called recreational side of things. I think it's interesting because it does show what I have been fearful of and been trying to articulate for a couple of years now in this space, that I fear the medicinalization of cannabis, the so-called adult use recreational market and industry is a part of a Trojan horse for the full medicinalization of cannabis, the acceptance globally that cannabis is a medicine and only a medicine. And in the same way, we're not entitled to a recreational or adult use opium market or any other scheduled drugged markets when it's controlled as a medicinal substance. The same would then be true of cannabis. This would cause obviously massive problems because it'd be the recriminalization of potentially hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people in direct forward-facing business in the US. It would lead to an immediate conglomeratization and, big fish eating the little fish until there's 3 fucking sharks left. And the power that would be in that industry in North America, obviously with Mexico moving, it's got a human rights mandate. It should be creating a air quotes legalized system. That's 125 million. US is like 330, Canada's 60, 70 million, something like that. I can't remember. But in terms of the power block of that, that then I think lays the foundations, like I said, that the US would then push Canada and potentially Mexico and others, and even internationally, into this scheduling of cannabis internationally as an accepted medicinal drug, but only controlled by the established pharmaceutical industrial complex. So yeah, there's a lot to understand and unpack there. I will be writing, like I said, my next Weed World article about this and exploring it a bit more. So hopefully I'll have some answers to those questions and a bit more of a nuanced understanding of what is happening. But as I alluded to earlier, I am very much enthused and not happily surprised, but welcoming of news that quite a few activists, advocates, and champions within the space are saying that no, fuck rescheduling. Deschedule that bitch. You know me, guys, I've been advocating for this for a while here in the UK, and I believe that descheduling plus decriminalizing equals truly legalization. Whereas if you create this corporate capital L quotes legalization, that, or neo-legalization system, as we've sort of described on previous episodes, that creates a new criminalization on a system, in the system, rather than an erasure of that previous criminalization, if that makes sense. So yeah, we have to deal with the history of this bullshit before we can build the fucking future. That's my stance. That's the hill I'm going to die on. And it's great to see a lot more people kind of coming around to this. So kudos, doth my cap. Yeah, hope you guys enjoyed that. If you did, please give us a like, a share, a rating, subscribe, all the usual things across all of those platforms. Appreciate all the feedback as always. Yeah, drop us any comments below if there's any feedback you want to give or anything you want to kind of push a conversation on. I'm sure many of the other viewers will be interested in your comments as well. All right, folks, check us out on all social. Very tongue-tied. All right, folks, check us out on all social media platforms at The Simpa Life. Check out thesimpalife.com for more content, blogs, articles, etc. Check us out on Patreon if you really enjoyed this, and yeah, chuck us a couple of quid, help me keep the lights that are currently cooking me in this studio turned on, and this wonderful content coming to your ears and eyes. All right, folks, I'll let you go. We'll be back next week with somebody who'll be awesome. You'll enjoy it. I'll enjoy it. All right, I'm gonna get out of here because I'm cooking. All right, peace and love, folks. It is so warm. I don't know how, if you can see, actually, you probably can because my forehead looks so greasy. It is warm in here today.